Yeah, welcome back from the break, and welcome from my side to, I guess, the presentation of the longest title. It's From Urban Planning to Historical Reconstructions, CityEngine at the core of 3D workflows in a public administration. So first, I'm quickly going to talk a bit about me, what I'm doing or what we are doing, and I have a second part about our workflow, and the third part will be a bit more focused on the projects we're working on. So the first part, to have it really quickly, my name is Tobias Frey. I'm a GIS and mixed reality project manager at the Urban Planning Department of the City of Zurich. I post some text in here, so it's about the coordination of some projective architecture and urbanistic nature, but to make it short, the fields we're working in is mostly urban planning, it's construction, architecture, environment, some of it mobility, and some of it archaeology as well. But this just as a quick introduction to what I'm doing or what our background is to see a bit where it's going. Now this main part, and it's also about what the presentation is, the CityEngine at the core of our workflow. So what do we use CityEngine for? It's mainly 3 points, I would say. So the first one is the integration of data from various sources, for example, from our digital twin. I'll come back to that one later. The second part is the creation of novel 3D models, for example, new designs for urban planning, or very often also the 3D representation of already existing 2D data. And the third part is, the visualization, and in our case, it's often the past, the present, and very often, at least in the case of urban planning, the future. But what does our workflow kind of look like? I try to break it down to the core parts. So the first thing that we have, and it's mostly a source, but not always, it's this what I call digital twin space. It's a lot of GIS data, some of it is 3D, a lot of it is 2D. There's building information modeling data, most of it 3D, of course. And we use that as an input to CityEngine, but sometimes also stuff that we produce in CityEngine goes back into that space. Then the second space that we have is, I would call it a project space. It is specific projects in urban planning where we have, for example, a specific area of interest, but often also some 2D plans or even some 3D buildings. That all normally goes into CityEngine, and from there we can feed kind of our publication space, which is mixed reality, web apps, open data, there's renderings included, and sometimes virtual reality as well. But as you see, it's kind of CityEngine that is in the core that's bringing all the data together and then bringing it out to the publication space. I just quickly try to get some of the things that we've done in the last few years to give you an impression on what we've been working on. And one of the examples here is for one of the public votes we had in the last few months. There was in the voting materials that all the voters here in the city of Zurich got, there was a small image in there that came directly from CityEngine that showed the visualization of a planned project where people voted on. Then another example, it's an environment that we had for a small virtual reality application where it was about road security for cyclists, where it was all generated in CityEngine, and some of the features that you see on the left there on the tram station that was added from a library that is existent in the city of Zurich with like low poly models of I would say like the traditional stations that we have here. Then some of the things that we're doing quite often now is that we work with mixed reality, where we bring those models to people that make decisions, or in the case that we see here, it was just a demonstration to show people what we're able to do. For example, you have this very complicated 2D plan that you also see here on the ground, and then if you bring it to 3D, it kind of gets quite easily to understand, and you can walk around the model and look at different things and explain stuff on it. This has mostly been now about the future, but we're also working in the past because we have the archaeologists in the urban planning department. For example, here we have an exhibition that took place in 2017 where we brought those buildings that they dig out in an archaeological dig. We brought them back to the exact place where they stood some 5,000 years ago. But the same data was also used to make some renderings to go into publications. You see again, there was this, it all started in CityEngine and then went on different paths to the publication. But now I'd like to focus mostly on two bigger projects, I would say, to give you a bit an in-depth look at these. The first one is this urban planning workflow that we often have. I would call it now the future. So in that workflow, we mostly use the dots that we have here in blue. So we have GIS data that we bring into CityEngine, and mostly to give us the context that we need. And then from a project space, we have urban planners, we have architects that come up with ideas. Sometimes it's just a drawing on a paper. Sometimes it's a bit more, maybe it's a 3D model that we already have. And we bring those things together in CityEngine. And the important thing for us, it needs to be as easy as possible. So we're not going to see super beautiful visuals, I would say, but it's always for us where we need CityEngine, it needs to be productive, it needs to be fast. This workflow we're doing over and over again, so we can't spend too much time on getting it to the most beautiful visualization, because we just need something where you can decide on a 3D model. So how does it normally work? We often have just an area of interest that we see here on the top right. With that area of interest, we have a fully automated pre-processing workflow that runs mostly on Python that brings all the 2D and 3D data from our digital twin together. That's what you see there on the right side, and where it slowly starts to form this model. We bring it into CityEngine. We have certain rules that we put on the data to get it in that look that we need. And then there's this part of the creation of urban studies. So where we go and delete buildings, we add new buildings. We have this dedicated rule for this, that makes it quite quick to draw new studies and compare them. And what's really important there is that we always have these characteristic parameters for the buildings that later on will also make decisions easier to see if it's within the parameter spaces that we need them, but I'll show that in an example later. And after that, we have the data ready to export to web applications, for example, or mixed reality experiences. I have an example here that shows it quite nicely. But first, on how does it work? So we have it's just like a small example that I made for this presentation, but we have some building, we have a few data about it, but very often in those early scenarios, it's not more that we need. We just need those few numbers that urban planners need, and we can get rid of that building, we can draw a new one, and then we can look at the numbers, how they change, and maybe optimize it for the number where we want to go, and still have something that is a bit more visual than just like a 2D plan, and gives us advantages for looking at shadows, for example. And that data then we can take on to, for example, a 3D view in a browser, or what is now more and more the case, we bring it to augmented reality, and we can use that in, for example, architectural competitions, where you can take the data outside, look at it, for example, in an office like it's the case here, or we can go in place and look at the building, how it would be in the real context to get an idea of the design and mostly the size of it, which is very important in urban planning. But we can also, for example, add data that's about zoning laws to see like how big buildings can be in certain parts. So this is about the part that I would say goes towards the future. The other part that we have, and that's kind of a bigger project that's taking a bit more time than what we've seen before, is the historical 3D city models of Zurich. It's a project we're currently working on. And there it's mostly 2D and 3D data that comes from the project space. It's not that much connected to the digital twins, so it's showing the city some 5,000 years ago or 200 years ago, and of course the stuff we have currently in the digital twin is mostly from the last few years. But that data goes through CityEngine, or parts of it, and then into the publication space, and which in that case will be a web app. It will be open data available, and there will be a few renderings of it. So how it works in that project, it's a 5-year project we're working on. We're now in the 2nd year. The goal is to complete 6 historical 3D models of Zurich from 3000 before Christ, and the last one is some 200 years ago. What we see here on the right is a map of the one from 1800, so 200 years ago. There's a few buildings still missing there, but it's mostly completed. And we did the calculations. Actually, it's really more than 99.9% of all buildings were generated in CityEngine. because it's mostly rural buildings where we also don't have too much knowledge on. So it's very handy to use CityEngine and the dedicated rule for it. But of course, there's more than just the buildings to those historical 3D city models. So there's topography, there's the ground cover, there's trees and so on. And that all comes from GIS data that we collected in the last year together with archaeologists. And it goes through extensive post-processing. And I thought I could give kind of a glimpse at it. So the overall design is what we see here. I'm not going to go into details. We have some stuff that we're working on internally here on the left. We have a few processes here, and then on the right we have the data that goes kind of outside that will be openly available. But one of those processes, for example, is for all the ground cover that gets it from the simple 2D data into a nice photorealistic rendering. And I thought I'm just going to show a quick overview in FME how that looks at process that gets all the rivers running and stuff. But I'm not going to go into details here. But for us, it's important that it is always CityEngine that plays a role. In that case, it's the buildings. But of course, there's as well that then in the end will come together. And luckily, we have a few first glimpses at it. I think that's the first time we're showing this to people outside the city. So enjoy it. So this is what it then might look like, with a few more details added in the future. So this is the city of Zurich in 1800 with a few bridges missing, I guess. There's kind of a few buildings missing over here, but we'll eventually get there. And we have another one that shows it a bit brighter. So it's the whole city of Zurich, how it is today, that we covered for 1800. Currently, we have buildings, of course, over here as well. But as you see, 200 years ago, it wasn't that dense, I would say. And with this, I'll finish, I think, a bit before time, but it's good. Yeah, thank you. And I'm open for questions later.